He waved the finger. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Robert.
Good. As I started, we had an excellent class yesterday in centering prayer. Patrick and Ginger Barnett were our facilitators, and David Wallace, who is our
Hot co-coordinator.
Co-coordinator
Heart of Texas
for contemplative prayer
outreach co-coordinator.
in Central Texas. And he did an excellent job.
Good.
I'm always blessed when we meet somebody that's in the work and doing the work well. Do you ever know when you're around somebody that makes a difference in life? And David was definitely that type of person. And coming off of that, it kind of put a cap on some other things I've been working on. Madeline and I had a conversation this week that it's time for another step in our spiritual journey. So a lot of you don't know what I did. That's great. Thank you. You can't duck. You're in the camera no matter what. But anyway, part of my training, if you will, my work for a doctorate in divinity and metaphysics is understanding the metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. And one of the things that people really don't realize is all the stories in the Bible are metaphors for the spiritual life of an individual. So if you start with Genesis in the beginning and go through all the stories, each story is another step in the consciousness and awareness of us as a human being. And then you get into what Jesus shared with us, which is the new revelation, and Jesus spoke in metaphors. So it's kind of fascinating to look at them from a metaphysical standpoint. Now, not everybody buys into that. Everybody got it? And if you understand that language is extremely valuable, the idea is words mean things. And when you say a word, there are many, many interpretations of words. An example that comes to mind is if I say I'm sorry, sorry means different things at different levels. Anybody agree?
Yep.
You could be a sorry person, or you could be repentant, or just plain sorry. So there's lots of words and lots of meanings for different words. And whether we know it or not, the great unconscious, which is connected to our subconscious, has meanings. And those meanings come through the great carnal mind, if you will, and influence us. So it's a very fascinating idea. And this is involved in languaging and semantics and a lot of other ideas. Some of you that might be in the psychological areas, there were 5 identified therapists who made a real difference in people's lives. One of them was a doctor by the name of Erickson. And the language of Erickson is known as Ericksonian language. And he literally would babble to people. And people would say, he doesn't make any sense, and they'd change. Because he was talking to the subconscious mind, not the conscious mind. And he had learned how to language words to talk directly to the subconscious mind rather than the conscious mind.
Wow.
Now that is occurring all the time in the Bible. So we're gonna start dealing with some of those ideas. And the first story that I picked up that I decided to share with you was the first miracle that Jesus did, which was changing the water to the wine. Now, it's a very simple idea, right? Changing water to wine. But what is the metaphysical interpretation behind that? Charles Fillmore was deeply embedded in the metaphysical interpretation and metaphors. When you get involved in psychology classes, and I'm going to say more advanced spiritual awareness, at the deeper levels, you start looking at what are the inside meanings. In other words, if I'm looking at Bruce, I'm going to say something. Bruce is invisible. Now, I see body, and I see flesh, and I see skin, and I see eyeglasses, and I see hair, but do I see that entity called Bruce? No. Bruce is a soul within a machine that is working in this physical existence, but Bruce himself is invisible because Bruce has his own thoughts. Anybody agree you can't understand what Bruce is thinking? You don't, and I don't mean to pick.
I've been trying to figure it out for years. I just gave up.
See, and I don't mean to pick on Bruce because we can talk about any of us, but each one of us is different at the spiritual level. So there is the visible and there's the invisible to everything. Now, one of the issues with words are that words are important, and it's like Madeline sometimes will tell me when we're in a discussion, she'll say, change your words, because she doesn't understand what I'm saying. You there? And the word doesn't have the impact that I have in my mind. So in languaging, we have a picture in our mind. We put words in a sequence to describe the picture we're going to say. And then that goes out into the air and lands in your ears. And then you process it, put it into your brain, come up with images. Now, what is the chance that exactly the same image I'm seeing before I communicate is exactly the same image that lands in your mind? Do you see the difficulty? That's why it's extremely important not to be one-tracked. In other words, in life, there's many, many different ways to do things, okay? So if I'm on this track and I listen to only this, I'm hearing only part of the story, whatever it is. So in a spiritual life, I'm saying we need many tracks and we need to coordinate them so we understand who we really are. And that's the big, everybody wants to know the mystery of life. The mystery of life is that communication is confusing because it doesn't land in everybody's mind exactly the same way. And there's hidden meanings behind all words. Okay, now let's look, what I want to do is go into the metaphysical interpretation of changing water into wine. And the first thing Jesus did was go to the wedding and change the water to wine. But there's a story behind it, so I'd like to share it with you, okay? So, here we go. Now, this is in John. Where are they?
We need to get you a string of it.
Yeah, I do. Oh, well. Yeah, I'll borrow yours.
My girly glasses. Only if they have points on them. And they're pink.
But this is an interesting story, and you hear the story somewhat. But there's a few nuances to the story that are fun, okay? So, it starts out John 2, and by the way, the whole history of Jesus up to that point is, not in John. And John, it says, chapter 2, on the third day there was a marriage feast in Cana. Okay, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the marriage feast. Okay, and so Jesus' mother was there. Everybody there? Now, by third verse, and when the new wine ran low, his mother said to Jesus, "They have no wine." Anybody get requests from mom? Listen to his answer. You ready? He says in verse 4, Jesus said to her, "Why is it to me and to you, woman? What is it? For what reason do I need to know about this?" So, and then he said, "My turn has not yet come." So he's saying, "I'm not ready, buzz off." Now, those aren't the exact words, but is that the meaning behind this as I read it? Sure it is.
And does she listen to him?
Yeah. Now the next verse, Pat, is perfect. Next verse says, she calls in the servants, okay? His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he tells you, do it." So now she's got him on the stage saying, "You got to do it." Okay? Then it goes
Sounds like
on.
a good Jewish mom.
Jewish mom. Perfect, it really is. Then it goes on and says, and there were 6 stone jars placed there for the purification of the Jews, which could hold several gallons each. So we're not talking a little flask, we're talking big pots. Everybody got it? Now, why stoneware pots? If you go into the revealed word, and I encourage everybody to have a copy of this, this is Charles Fillmore's Dictionary of Metaphysical Interpretation. You ready? And water pots, specifically stone water pots. The 6 water pots of stone in John 6 represent the 6 nerve centers in the body. Hello? So all the nerve centers in the body that control motors, smell, touch, sight, those are the metaphors for the 6 nerve centers from the 6 stone pots. Okay? So we got that much done. Then it goes on and says, Jesus said, and there were 6 stones, and Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." and they filled them up to the brim. So Jesus said, okay, Mom, I'll do it. Okay, literally. All right? Then it goes on and says, so Jews said to him, I went too far. Then he said to them, draw out now and bring it to the chief guest. Now, the chief guest is the wedding planner, the one that's running everything in today's world. Okay? And when the chief guest, or wedding planner, tasted the water that had become wine, he did not know when it came, because they had run out, and he had this new wine. Now, here's what's interesting. It goes on, and then they said to him, every man at first brings the best wine. So the wine steward is saying to the host, you know, in a Jewish wedding or a Canaan wedding, what they do is they save the bad wine for last, because everybody's going to be drunk. Because these things last 2 or 3. This is not a 2-hour thing. This is 2 or 3 days. So you got to look at what's happening at that time. So he said, every man at first brings the best wine, and when they have drunk, then that which is weak, but you have kept the best wine until last. So what does that say? That the transformation was perfect into a high class, high vitality, pure wine. So what is the metaphor for the miracle? That's what we have to look. It goes on and talks about a lot of other things, but it says this is the first miracle which Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee, and he showed his glory in the beginning. So let's take a look at and reveal what water means. Because what we're doing is taking water and transferring into wine. So what is the meaning? What is the metaphor? What is the metaphysical interpretation? Because stories in the Bible are not just random. See, we got to understand that the Bible itself is thousands of years old. It has been worked with over and over and over again. When the Jews were in bondage in Babylonia, we know that scribes changed things. So a lot of these stories made sense in the secret language of at the time, because they were afraid to speak exactly the way it was, because they didn't want to be persecuted. So there was a secret language and there was a metaphysical language. But the metaphysical language comes down to us, because if we say words of God, would you agree they have a higher meaning than just normal words? So that's the conversations. So water, are you ready? I've got to find water. Okay. So water, from the intellectual viewpoint. Now this is the point of the mind. Remember I said the mind runs things and we are being intellectual. We try to figure things out. So from a physical figuring out mode, water represents cleansing. So when John the Baptist baptized with water, he washed away the sin of the external character. You hear the term external character. So it was a physical ritual to keep the mind happy, to make people feel good. Okay? Now, it also goes on and says, here, it takes something more than powerful than water to purify the arid conditions accumulated by the soul in its many incarnations. So we have talked about, if you want to get into, we won't get too involved in reincarnation, but you are reincarnated over and over again. And epigenetics tells us we're going back 6 and 7 generations in DNA dealing with. So we are full of stuff. Now it goes on and explains that water penetrates. If you understand this, if you put water in any kind of vessel, it fills the whole vessel. Right? In other words, every millimeter of room is filled with water. You put water on a sponge and the sponge is wet immediately. You drop water on a tablecloth and it spreads all over the place. So water is a symbol of occupying space. So in that context, water is a negative metaphysical symbol because it symbolizes the subconscious mind and how the subconscious mind has filled every cell in our body. So metaphysically, it is the negative subconscious mind taking over. Anybody ever had water in your house? I mean, you talk about a mess and cleaning it up, because it goes everywhere. and influences everything that it touches. So do you get the picture? And that is, and I'm going to read this, okay? It signifies, let's see, where'd it go? The presence of God's grace is necessary to purify this part. In other words, what happens is it's negativity that takes over and is like the doubts and fears that come up automatically. Do you ever wonder where thoughts come from? It's like, if I decide to do something that's really good for me, do you ever notice how I get that negative thought? Boom. And see, that's the conditioned subconscious mind that is being connected with the carnal mind, which is everywhere present. It's called the oversoul. So that's what we're dealing with. You there? Now, what is wine? Okay, you ready? So we're going to change that negative aspect that is everywhere present, and we're going to look at what is wine. And wine says, right here, right now, wine symbolizes the vitality that forms the connecting link between the soul and the body. So there's a connecting link with whom? With spirit. And then it goes on, it represents an all-pervading, free essence that is generated from the nerve substance or water of life. The wine of life, or the vitality of the organism, is now available in large quantities to create a spiritual transformation in the entity. So what we're talking about is taking the subconscious negative parts of us that we're born into and changing that into spiritualizing it. So everybody there? So why was that the first miracle Jesus did? Do you see how it sets a base for everything he said? Because you have to have this understanding before you start understanding a lot of stuff that's in the Sermon on the Mount and all the others. So it's really kind of fascinating in its context. Now, I'm on a roll. And all kinds of ideas kept coming to me. I had to write things down. And I was thinking, Madeline has been correcting me. I talk about your God within, or child of God. And remember I said words land differently? And there's people that can speak language to change things. So everyday language has power to it. But it's like we have been raised, some of us have been raised to fear God. Is that part of a doctrinal belief? Yeah. He's like, we talk about the vengeful God. So if I talk about God to somebody that has that basic still somewhere in their skull, they're going to tune it out. And really, that's where she's been. But we started understanding and using the word power. There's a power within you, a universal power that is changing you day by day from water to wine. You see the metaphor? And that's what's necessary. Now, there's many roads to the mountaintop. Everybody there? And languaging is important. A lot of times we think words don't mean things. They mean things. And when we say words that are disparaging, those words are stored subconsciously, and you project them out as part of your consciousness. It's part of changing from the water to the wine, and we become wine when we start using more spiritual ideas. That's the idea behind affirmations, prayer, centering prayer, hanging around folks like you that talk positive. How many of you are getting tired of the negative language out there? It's really getting ridiculous. And of course, I'm being judgmental when I say that.
No, you just...
I have to be careful. See, when I see anything bad, I'm part of it. Okay, remember that. Anything I see, I have reflected from myself. So that whole idea is really fascinating to me. Now, there's more here. There's a story. Some of you are probably familiar with this story, and I was reminded of it. It came back to me. There's a story called Acres of Diamonds by a man by the name of Russell Wilson, I think. No, Connell. He is the man that founded Temple University in Philadelphia, with my hometown. And he raised the money for Temple University by doing this speech all over the world. And it was evidently true. Now, I can't verify that. But he talked about acres of diamonds. And he talked about a farmer in South Africa. And it was a farmer, he had a fairly good-sized farm. He had an orchard. he lived comfortably, not wealthily, but comfortably. The farmer heard a speaker talking about diamonds that were available. He had never heard of diamonds, didn't know anything about them, and got all excited that he was going to find diamonds. And he knew he had enough money. If he sold his farm, he could raise enough money to go looking for diamonds. And this was back years ago. So he sold his farm, and a good farm, ongoing farm, and started searching. And he searched evidently all over Africa, all over India, everywhere. And finally ran out of money and died broke. The guy that bought his farm, a couple of years later, was walking out beside a stream, by a river, and picked up a pretty rock. And he looked at the rock and he said, "Isn't that nice?" And he took it home and put it on his mantle at the fireplace. And evidently it stayed there for quite a while, a couple of years. All of a sudden, he had a friend stop by. The friend saw the rock, picked it up and said, "Do you know what you have here?" And he evidently had found one of the largest diamonds on record. And that farm became the largest diamond mine in the history of South Africa. And evidently is still producing today. Here's the key. We keep looking out there for something that's already in here. So it's part of the process is changing the water to the wine. Now, Jesus, as far as we know, did it immediately. Wouldn't that be nice? But it's a drip, in my opinion. Now I'm limiting myself by saying this, but it takes time, and it takes different input because words are different. It's like when I'm speaking, sometimes I try to listen on the words that I'm using, but there's great spiritual teachers everywhere. So the more spiritual teachers I hear, the more I can put things together. So that's one reason we as a church are doing different things. Now, somebody that likes A Course in Miracles might not like A Course of Love, or might not like Joel Goldsmith, or some of the other things we do. I do know there's one basics that we're working on. Anybody agree, the Bible? But it's understanding the Bible in its true form and the metaphysical interpretation as well as the spiritual interpretation. So it's kind of fascinating when you really start looking at things. And there's all kinds of stories, the story of Jericho, all kinds of neat things we can get into, which I will start sharing more of that. But this whole idea of water to wine, that's what we are doing. Now, one of the keys to it is the community, the event was a wedding. So what happens at a wedding? Somebody help me.
People get married.
People get married, yeah. And it's a joyful time.
Celebration.
It's a celebration. It's a celebration of union.
Right.
So the metaphors are everywhere. So we are one. The key to it is, Course of Love talks about the key to life is union. The secret code is God loves you, and each one of us has acres of diamonds. It's already there. And we go, and you know, I openly admit, anyway, I will say it. We have moved so many times looking for that next opportunity, and I forgot.
It's
Opportunity's here.
It's right here.
We are in the middle of opportunity because we are full of God, and we have all changed the water negative part of who we are to the wine part of who we are. So that's kind of like what I'd like to share with you. You thinking?
We may be diamonds, but we're diamonds in the rough, and you're just bringing up.
You are diamonds. The acres of diamond thing really, it came to me, and we are thinking about the great. See, we're talking about the great secrets of life, and the great secrets of life are invisible because they are incorporeal, which means they don't have body. So the real you does not have a body.
Right.
You have created a body in order to visit in this physical world, but we are all spirits, and God is spirit, and it says God is spirit, and we must worship him in spirit and in truth. So what we're looking for doesn't have body, doesn't have form, and that's why we have such a hard time believing it. So I'm looking around at form that is full of God. Okay, so that's who we are. And that's really what I wanted to leave with you this morning, and the idea that each one of us is in the process of becoming that pure wine. probably the best vintage wine you could ever drink.
Amen.
And I love you for that. Thank you, I'm done.
Thank you.
Next,
That was good.
Robert, I have a joke related to your sermon.
wine.